Now, from San Diego, Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. John Clickman in for Jerry Usher. Keep him in your prayers. He's out on the road working with our affiliates again this week. He'll be back in on Monday. In the meantime, we've got another great hour coming your way, finishing up the week here for Catholic Answers. Our guest this hour is Robert Lockwood, or Bob Lockwood, and our subject's going to be Catholic urban legends. Yes, they do exist, and one in particular we're going to discuss in detail this hour is Pope Joan. Yeah, that's what I said, Pope Joan. But first of all, let me tell you a little bit about Robert P. Lockwood. He's a graduate of Fairfield University in Connecticut with a degree in history. In 1984, Lockwood was named editor-in-chief of our Sunday Visitor. He was appointed publisher in 1987 and elected president in 1990. He then served with the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights from January 2000 to June of 2001 as director of research and chapter coordinator. Robert is presently director for communications for the Diocese of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's the author of many books, including The Mission and Future of the Catholic Press, which came out by Catholic Press Association back in 1998. I like this title, The 10 Commandments for Sports Parents. He was the general editor and a contributor to Anti-Catholicism in American Culture. His most recent book is A Faith for Grown-Ups, a midlife conversation about what really matters. That came out in 2004. Robert has won numerous awards from the Catholic Press Association for his column, Catholic Journal, as well as feature writing and editing. He received the first annual Cardinal Cushing Award from the Center for the Applied Research in the Apostolate back in 1999 for support of Catholic research, and was recognized by the Catholic Press Association for distinguished contributions to Catholic journalism in nomination for the 2000 St. Francis de Sales Award. Bob Lockwood, welcome back to Catholic Answers Live.
Oh, thanks. It's always great to be with you.
Pleasure to have you with us. Okay, step one, let's define what is a Catholic urban legend.
Okay, to put it very simply, they're myths or misrepresentations of the past that are presented and believed as unvarnished historical truths, okay? They're routinely dismissed by any serious historian. They become, if you will, cultural truisms, baptized over time as normative thinking and part of the cultural baggage of the progressive mind. Give a good example. The common, ordinary person's understanding of the Crusades is that, the Pope called the Crusades in order to invade a harmless and helpless Islam, which, of course, has nothing to do with the history of the Crusades whatsoever. The Crusades began because Constantinople and the Eastern Empire had been virtually overrun and invaded, and it began as a means to assist the Eastern Emperor. Now, that's giving a very, concise history of a very complicated topic. But this is what happens with urban legends, is the basic history is kind of forgotten because it's been rewritten for propaganda purposes, frankly, usually during the Reformation period, and especially in the United States, which inherited, if you will, an English understanding of European history. A lot of this anti-Catholic propaganda is presented as fact and believed by everybody. So that's essentially what we do with Catholic urban legends, is we're not engaging so much in apologetics as we're just trying to say, wait a second, if you're going to argue Galileo to prove that the church has opposed science for 500 years, and therefore raise Galileo as some kind of trump card if we're talking about stem cell research, well, wait a minute. Let's go back, first of all, and try to understand what Galileo really was and what really happened. And Pope Joan is a classic example of a Catholic urban legend.
Well, that's the next question now. Tell us a story about Pope Joan and and how that all came around.
Okay, very quickly, that here it is. Pope Joan was a female pope, okay? That, this is what the legend says, that she was a female pope elected approximately 1855. She had disguised herself as a man. She was actually born in Mainz, Germany, and then went to England for some period of time, and then to Athens for some period of time, and then in, I believe it was 855, after the death of Leo, she was allegedly then elected pope. She had gone to Rome, rose high in the Curia, was this well-educated person. Everybody, of course, thought she was a man. And then 2.5 years into her reign, she was in the middle of a papal procession when what should happen? She suddenly gives birth to a child, okay?
Oh,
Roman mob goes crazy. It kind of depends on which legend you're talking about. She was either, stoned to death, or one legend had her dragged around, attached to a tail of a horse all over Rome. Anyway, and then she was murdered, and that's the end of that. Now, the only problem with the legend of the female Pope Joan is that she never existed. Okay, that's the only problem with that legend. Only little fly in the ointment, so to speak. The simple fact is that Pope Joan was never mentioned, no existence, no anything, till about 300 years after her alleged papacy. Now, the simple fact is that 300 years with no mention, and all of a sudden it starts popping up as a legend, will generally give you a pretty good idea that you're not dealing with historical fact. I mean, but what Pope Joan served for, if you will, is that the legend, and there's, we can talk about later where it may have come from or things like that, if our listeners are interested in that. But the legend itself served a purpose. First, it served a purpose 300 years afterwards as a kind of anti-clericalism, anti-papalism to the perspective. We want to make the papacy not look particularly good. Say, oh, well, there's a story of Pope Joan, that it was so weak and silly and so corrupt that actually a woman could be elected. Protestant Reformation, it was used again as a symbol of the corruptness of the papacy. That view persisted till about the 19th century, where it kind of got tied up in this whole idea of clerical lasciviousness, if you will, and that this poor woman was seduced and everything else by this evil clerical culture. Now, of course, in the late 20th, early 21st century now, it's been reborn as a kind of if you will, feminist iconography, that here was this brave, strong woman ahead of her time, and then it's used to kind of denigrate celibacy, virtually anything about the church that you care to want to go after. Catholic urban legends always persist because they can be used. They make for nice anti-Catholic stories to reaffirm whatever contemporary prejudice somebody wants to reaffirm. So that's essentially the story of Pope Joan.
That's great. We're on the phone with Bob Lockwood, and our subject this hour is Catholic urban legends, and I guess they have persisted for 2,000 years, and we're also discussing one specifically, Pope Joan. If you like to ask a question to Bob, 888-318-7884 to be on the show. That's 888-31-TRUTH. That's our studio line to get you on the air. Maybe you have a Catholic urban legend you want to ask him a question about. That might be something you want to call in about. You're mentioning some of as we head into this, the end of the 20th, into the 21st century. I guess back it was in 2005 on ABC News, Diane Sawyer did a bit about a show.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and then the inaccuracies in that one.
That was kind of almost laughable, but, I don't know whether to blame Diane or the writers. But again, she now crafted the story as being this great little feminist thing about a bright young girl managing to sneak into a monastery because she thirsted for education. She disguised herself as a boy, became an adept student, and blah, 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 moved along the way. But then, of course, Sawyer likes to, she ended up embellishing the whole story, describing this little Joan arriving at Rome, which Sawyer calls the home of, quote, bawdy monks, scheming cardinals, cross-dressing saints. I don't know where she got that from. Intrigue, melodrama, corruption.
These were actual quotes.
Violence.
These were quotes she did on the show.
That's actual quotes from the show. And then, of course, Joan manages in this corrupt environment to get elected pope. And then, of course, Joan talks about, a usual type of ending to the story. The baby's born during a papal procession, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, kicking the legend into high gear, she was, Diane reported that it was an embarrassment over Pope Joan that led to mandated priestly celibacy, a church crackdown on powerful female mystics, and a host of, quote, women martyrs in that era, women who were tortured for their religious beliefs. I don't know where the heck all that came from. But, again, this was presented on an ABC News special. And it was really funny because they interviewed a very prominent churchman, prominent church historian at the time, and they asked him about this. And, of course, he almost got a case of the giggles in it because all he could do was basically say, well, that's crazy. It's just crazy.
Really?
And, of course, then they went on. They interviewed, what's her name? It was Donna Woolfolk Cross, who, of course, wrote a book in, I think it was around 1995. It was a fiction. It was a novel that she embellished the legend of Pope Joan into a novel. It was actually very popular. It was kind of so-so popular in the States, but was hugely popular over in Europe. And again, it was that idea of the feminist tract. Now, to give kind of a punctuation point, rumor has it that right now a major movie is being made based on the legend of Pope. Yeah, just when we've finally gotten rid of the Da Vinci Code and everything, we're back again. That there may be a Pope Joan movie that's being made by rather prominent type thing. It's not being done in the States. I think it's being done in Europe. Now there was a Pope Joan movie made in 1972 with Liv Ullmann. Some might remember that name. She was a popular actress back in the 60s and 70s and actually did some very good stuff. But somehow she got roped into doing a Pope Joan movie, which was a real stinker. And generally people thought, well, that'll be the end of Pope Joan movies. But new generation, best-selling book, and there you go. That's how you end up with the possibility of a new Pope Joan movie.
Wow. So
I'm sure they'll take the tact of a feminist martyr at the hands of an evil church. Now, I have to stress, again, that the important thing to remember about Pope Joan, because people may hear this, they may, friend of theirs will say, what about that woman pope in the ninth century? The simple fact is that there's no place, if you will, in the chronicles of the popes, in the listings of the pope, and these listings are done by everything from contemporary histories at the time to historical artifacts to everything that exists. There's no place for her to be where they said she may have been pope, even if it had been 6 months rather than 2.5 years. It just couldn't happen. She was allegedly elected after the papacy of Leo IV, who was pope from 847 to 855. He was actually a rather strong pope. he was immediately succeeded by Benedict III, and they know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, of those times in that papacy, because there was some dispute, an attempt by the Eastern Emperor to control the election of the papacy and to put his own person in the papacy. So there's not even like a vague historical record during the period. It's extremely clear, and the Pope after that was Nicholas I, who again was a rather strong Pope, and they know a lot about him. Now, another interesting thing about this is that Pope Joan, that the legends appeared about 300 years after her alleged papacy. And the legends first appeared, this was prior to the Reformation, so they appeared in Catholic chronicles, if you will. And during a time in the Middle Ages, there was an assumption that the legend was true, simply because in some of this early documentation, 300 years later, it was listed. And as we know from a lot of myths and from a lot of legends, over time, and that's what happens with Catholic urban legends, a certain truth, just kind of truth with a lowercase t, kind of falls on them. So it was common belief 300 years after the fact, again, I should stress, that there had been a female pope. Then the interesting thing that happened is in the early post-Reformation period, there was a lot of historical studies. Quite frankly, a lot of it was from Protestant scholars. In fact, that's where we got the name the Dark Ages, came from early Protestant post-Reformation history, which was trying to paint this evil picture of the papacy, and so they would dig up every what they would consider nasty historical fact that they could. But the interesting thing was that it was a Calvinist, early Calvinist historian by the name of Blondel, who was the first who said, wait a minute, there's no way in heck there could have been a Pope Joan. It was false. And of course, he was rudely informed that he better keep his mouth shut, because basically the quote was that was given to him, the Protestant interest requires the story of Joan to be true. So
it's kind of ironic that a Calvinist came through and actually told the truth.
Right.
And what year was that when
that would have been about, let me not say about, let me give you roughly the exact time that Blondel, this was 1590 to 1655.
So we're roughly 400-something years later, and even though he just, said it was not true, it still prevails even today.
Well, yeah, because part of the thing is that it had become part of the culture. Boccaccio in the 14th century, if people remember their Renaissance studies, he was a popular Renaissance poet. He had picked up the story. It probably would have been forgotten if he hadn't picked it up, because he wanted to use it again. It was anti-clerical, anti-papal legend. Again, which is kind of the irony in all this, is that the Pope Joan legend was never, during the periods in the Middle Ages, it was never used with the idea that, this will show you a story of a strong woman. No, that was never the purpose. The purpose of it was to show the papacy was so weak and so corrupt, and the church was so corrupt that even a woman could rise to power in it. So, if anything, it was probably it was anti-feminist, sexist, anti-women in its whole entire structure. Because the idea being that, this thing was, the situation was so bad that even a woman could become pope. And that's why it's rather ironic that in the late 20th century, somehow the legend is reborn as some kind of great feminist story. It was meant to be anti-feminist.
And Bob, if you're ready, we've got a couple calls online. Let's start taking those, if that's all right with you.
I'd love it.
Omaha, Nebraska, KVSS. Hi, Scott. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Hey there. Hey, gentlemen. Hey, Bob.
Hi, Scott.
Hey, I read a little bit on Pope Pius XII, and I understand there's some urban legends that come from his papacy and his relationship, or his supposed relationship with the Nazis, or his sympathy for them, and his ignoring the plight of the Jews. I know it stemmed from a play that came out in the 1960s and then steamrolled with a book called Hitler's Pope, by John Cromwell, who I heard later he recanted his data, although you didn't hear any of that in the fiction media, of course. But what sort of legends persist with Pope Pius XII and his alleged sympathy for the Nazis, or are they just all flat-out lies?
Well, I think that you outlined it very well. Basically, and this is what often happens with Catholic urban legends, the play that you refer to is called The Deputy. It was written, I think it was first performed in around 1960. And Pius, and of course, notice that date. That was after Pius had died, so he wasn't there to defend himself anymore. But essentially, the charge began that Pius kind of cynically ignored the plight of the Jews, okay? Now, the thing about this that was so extraordinary was that Pius had been honored worldwide up till the time of his death in 1958 for the hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives saved by the church during the Holocaust. And in fact, here he was virtually alone in Nazi-dominated Europe, and the church saved more Jewish lives than any other institution in Europe. I mean, it saved at least 500,000, possibly as much as 800,000 during the Holocaust, which was extraordinary. The church had no weapons, no army, no anything. The Pius business really came out of, more than anything, an attempt to discredit him because of being anti-communist. He got tied up in the left-right cultural wars in Europe. This is all after his death. Then in a really odd twist, it kind of disappeared for a while after The Deputy. When it got in the 70s, because it was so silly, nobody really paid serious attention to it, nor was there any serious consequences out of it. It just kind of faded away. But then when John Cornwell's book came out, called Hitler's Pope, we found a real curiosity. Cornwell goes through this whole story, kind of vague notions of here's why I think, Pius was pro-Nazi. It just wasn't a good argument. Pius was very early associated with the anti-Nazi activities of the papacy, very early in his papacy. But then Cornwell, you finally get to the end of the book, and you find out that the whole reason he's inventing this story is because he doesn't like Pope John Paul II. And he views Pius with the idea that if you knock down the idea of a strong papacy, if you cast an aspersion on a strong papacy as evidenced by Pope John Paul II, you can change the church, in whatever way that means, whether it be ordination of women, which was a topic strongly used. So in the height of cynicism, they were really raising this whole and kind of inventing this legend about Pius and using the Holocaust to make a internal political church point about the ordination of women and a strong papacy, which I think is rather revolting, if you ask me. But generally speaking, all this has faded away. No historian really treats it now. There was a burp with it in the 90s. No historian really treats it seriously anymore. But the problem is the damage is already done. in the common mind, there's a perception, because of all the attention that was paid to this, that Pius was you'll hear everything from a Nazi sympathizer to a closet Nazi who almost cooperated with the Holocaust. We've seen that urban legend develop out of nowhere, certainly within my own lifetime. And that in itself would make an interesting historical study, how a Catholic urban legend developed.
Fortunately, it even made it to some Catholics, even in my wife's RCIA class when she was RCIA, somebody had brought that up in there about his role in
Sure, and that's what you'll see. You see, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Scott, because it's a very important thing about understanding Catholic urban legends, particularly in the United States. Catholics are very often imbued with them. This is the kind of general milieu, the culture, if you will, in which we exist, is saturated with this kind of stuff, from everything from English post-Reformation propaganda to, as you brought up the example, Pius XII. And very often Catholics believe this as much as anybody else. They think, well, this is what history it is, and it has nothing to do with history.
Scott, thank you so much for calling. We appreciate that.
That was a great call, Scott.
It was. San Antonio, Texas, Guadalupe Radio. This is Gwen. Hi, Gwen. You're on the air at Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Great.
Great, Gwen.
My dad is Pentecostal, and he often tells me that the charismatic movement in the Pentecostal circles was actually started by 5 nuns that came from Germany. And so he always teases me saying, well, it's a Catholic thing that we do in our church, and I'm kind of confused about that, and I've never even heard of it. Have you?
No. I've got to be honest with you. That's one that I haven't heard. I don't know how the Pentecostal movement, which my recollection, and I readily can confess I'm not a historian of Protestantism, but my recollection is that the Pentecostal movement was kind of a early 20th century phenomenon, and I've never heard that 5 nuns brought it over from anywhere. Okay, if another listener out there has some further information on that, they'd be great if they could share it. But I think that's something that's just made up, and quite frankly, that happens a lot, where for some reason these movements feel that it gives them a certain credibility if they are associated with ex-Catholics. I don't understand the thinking. I think, again, it goes back to almost a Reformation mentality that there's something pure about people who have walked away from the church and seen the evils of Catholicism from within it, And then, because books by ex-Catholics have, right up again to our own day, you may have heard of the series of Alberto comic books from Jack Chick. This whole idea that it comes from a former Catholic seems to give it some kind of legitimacy. But, boy, I never heard that about Pentecostalism.
Okay, well, thanks.
Thanks, Gwen.
Thanks.
Appreciate you calling in. Let's take one more call before we have to go to a break. Dan, Vallejo, California. Hi, Dan. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Yes, sir. Before I ask my question, about a year and a half ago, the previous caller that you just had about Pope Pius XII, there was you guys had a Jewish rabbi on that actually wrote a book,
right?
Talking about that, and said that he did help some Nazis, but he was just a wonderful man, and he helped thousands of Jews, but he also did help some Nazis, and he was trying to stay out of the political
Rabbi
fray.
Dolan. And, of course, what he was referring to, it wasn't Pius directly so much, is that after World War II, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, that the Holy See was literally the only existing organized method to deal with the huge number of refugees that were in Europe at the time, trying to get them either relocated to their original home countries or located elsewhere. In the context of that, there's little doubt that some Nazis escaped to South Africa, and probably used the Holy See. But the Holy See was processing who knows how many hundreds of thousands of refugees, many of them Jewish, to get to their homeland. So the idea that somebody would, that some Nazis may have used this, that's not too hard to believe.
Question was originally about indulgences. I was watching a show on PBS, and they were talking about, Martin Luther was how he was one of the the most studious monks and the most devout, and he was what really turned him and started the Reformation was, and they actually showed a picture of this. It was almost like a piece of currency that they said that and it was done. The Pope authorized it, and they were actually sold by bishops. And what it was if a person was going to go out and have a drunken orgy or whatever, they would buy these. And it was a forgiveness of their sins. And they said that was the thing that Martin Luther was just appalled by that, and that was the turning point that turned him against Catholicism.
Okay, well, two things about that. Number one, Martin Luther's problems with the church were theological, okay?
Yes.
Certainly he used indulgences, okay, and the argument of indulgences fit within his theology, that essentially, and I don't want to, again, I'm not a theologian, but his essential point was that there's nothing we can do on our own personally to be saved, that salvation comes through Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone, which to a certain extent the church agrees with, of course, but there's the element of how we lead our lives and what we do that makes a difference in our own personal attaining heaven or not attaining heaven.
Did they actually sell those, though, the church?
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. The church sold indulgences, but here's a big thing. They didn't sell indulgences. For a contribution, you could gain an indulgence, but here's the big point. An indulgence was never, ever accepted. There's corruption anywhere. Somebody in the 15th century may have done this. It was never sold as, here you have an indulgence, go out and sin. The theology of indulgence was that you could draw on the infinite salvation of Christ to forgive the temporal punishment due to sin that you had already committed.
Oh, I see.
It was not hey, buy one of these and now I can go out and party. Okay?
Yeah.
It was never that. It was dealing with the after effects of sin, if you will. And it was always tied to the idea of confession of the sin and your disposition never to sin again. The idea was that all sin is an offense against an infinite, omniscient God, and that there's never anything we could do individually to make up for sin. We attain forgiveness through the sacrament of confession, and that an indulgence is a means to gain the graces that will limit the temporal punishment due to sin. But it was never an excuse. Never in Catholic theology was it ever a get out of jail free card.
Oh, I understand. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that call. I guess it's Bob Lockwood. And before we move any farther, Bob, we want to make sure Pope Joan did not exist. It's a complete legend, correct?
Right, absolutely.
Just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. There's no serious historian who would ever make the claim that she existed.
But if you have an urban legend that maybe you've ever thought of, a Catholic urban legend, this is the gentleman to talk to, 888-318-7884. out to Fort Wayne, Indiana, listening on 1450 AM. Hi, John. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Well, it's my pleasure to be on with you gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Hi, John. I lived many years in Fort Wayne.
Well, it's still here and booming.
Yeah, that's great.
The economy is just thriving leaps and bounds. I don't understand all this media talk, but we're not going to get into that one.
Okay.
What I'd like to ask is, I saw even on television this burying of the St. Joseph statue upside down in order to sell the home.
Yeah.
And
well, that's what
I cannot believe how many people believe in all this. I mean, I love St. Joseph, but do you think he's the reason we're selling our houses?
No, I think very possibly the devotion of the people that believe it and their faith might have something to do with it. But I can assure you it's not the burying of the statue. You know, it's really interesting. I had a friend of mine who owned a church goods store, and he meekly confessed that he kept a barrel of cheap St. Joseph statues, plastic statues in back for just that reason. And the funny part of it is the people who came in to buy it were these kind of very guilty-looking Protestants, okay, who came in and they had heard the story, and they wouldn't be caught dead in the Catholic church goods store, but they kind of wandered into that. You got any cheap St. Joseph's? No, it's just one of those myths, and more than a myth, that is perilously close to superstition.
Right. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Keep listening. We appreciate you. God bless. Out to Kansas City, Missouri, listening on 1090 AM. We have Father Frowen on the line. Hi, Father. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Father.
My question is I don't know if it's so much urban legend yet, but there's a sense of myth about it. Among people who support the ordination of women, they often say that some validly ordained Roman Catholic bishop has ordained one of their sort of lead women bishops as a bishop. And I know this isn't true, that simply cannot be done, no matter what motions someone may go through. But
That's
I wonder,
exactly
where does this come from?
Where it comes from, it is that group. You may have heard of them. In fact, we had one out in Pittsburgh just a few years ago.
Yes, I was going to school at St. Vincent at the time, and I remember how well, actually, the Diocese of Pittsburgh handled it. Not quite as well as St. Louis, but well.
Well, we did our best, but that actually happened during a very not difficult time, and I don't mean that the wrong way, but we were in transition. Bishop Worrell had already left, and he had left in June to become the Archbishop of Washington. And that ordination ordination, you know what I mean, this game they played out in the river, took place in July. But yeah, basically the group is called Women Priests, and their claim is that a validly ordained bishop had ordained one of them a bishop. But as you know, and as Father, as you mentioned, it would make no difference if a validly ordained bishop did such a thing, because there is an element of what makes a sacrament, and ordaining a woman would not make her a priest. It's as simple as that. But that is their claim. It came out of Germany, actually. The German woman who claimed that she had been secretly ordained a bishop.
Okay, so even the legend is sort of based in this secrecy and
they've never revealed his alleged name because they say, oh well, he'll get in big trouble if they do. They claim it. That's all you can say. But they've never revealed his name. And in essence, when the Holy See responded to them, they said, "Well, even if it was true, it wouldn't make any difference." And we have no proof that it is true. But we know too that it's not out of the question that a validly ordained bishop, for whatever reasons, everything from we're all sinners, whether we're ordained or whatever we are, and that could do something foolish at some point. But I tend to doubt that story very, very much by the fact that they've never revealed his name, never really said where it took place, when it took place. It was just kind of magically done. I think they invented it.
Yeah, that's a good point, and magic would be all it would be anyway. So thank you very much.
Very good magic.
Thank you, Father. We appreciate you calling in. God
Father.
bless you. Karen in New Mexico, listening on the internet on line 5. Hi, Karen. Welcome to Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, how are you all?
Good.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's a myth or not. I really don't know a whole lot about it, but my neighbor, who is not a Catholic, asked me one day about the Knights Templar.
Oh,
and never heard of it. I don't know anything about it, but she said she had learned that it was started in the church, and that I guess they worked for the church converting people, and that when they met their demise because the church owed the French money, so they killed the Knights Templar off in the 13th century, or... Do you know anything about this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the Knights Templar, there's probably about, 13 really bad novels out that use this idea of the Knights Templar. Everything that from a group that had... there was one book I read. I torture myself with these things, but I feel I should know them. That the Knights Templar held the secret of who Jesus really was, and all tied into the Mary Magdalene and all this kind of stuff. So the Knights Templar are kind of a favorite thing. Now the Knights Templar did exist.
Okay.
They were real. Okay.
Okay.
And basically, their original reason for existence was to assist pilgrims to the Holy Land, okay?
Okay.
And they ended up, let's see now, they had put together some pretty good financial backing, and they did indeed get into a big problem with the king in France. And the specifics of the story, it was that it wasn't so much jealousy over money. It was that they were kind of setting themselves up as an independent authority, and that ended up getting themselves in trouble. And they were playing a lot of politics, if you will. They were more political losers than anything else. These things happened.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of urban legends have been spun out of the Knights Templar. A lot of the Da Vinci Code stuff, all the things about secrets held for hundreds and hundreds of years and all that kind of stuff. The Knights Templars would be pulled out of the mix as playing that.
Would you say the Knights Templar was kind of a blight on the church? It wasn't. No, I would say that not at all. I would say that they performed good for a period of time, and I would say all that happened rather than a blight on the church is that sometimes, bluntly, organizations get involved in the politics of their day, and they lose. They back the wrong side. They pick the wrong side. And the Knights Templar, unfortunately, it had nothing to do with their religious beliefs or anything like that. They just got involved in government politics, and they picked the wrong side, and they lost. I see. Well, thank you very much for that help.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate you listening out there in New Mexico. We've got time probably for one more call. Modesto, California, listening on 1260 AM. Is it Clemente?
Yes, sir.
Hey, we got about a minute, Clemente. What's your question, sir?
Hey, here it goes. When I was in college at the University of Santa Cruz, I was hanging around a group of people that weren't necessarily Catholic. And when the issue of religion was brought up, they had mentioned to me that during the Mexican Civil War, when the soldiers, the actual federal soldiers would hold up in one of the missions, and the rebels would attack with cannon barrage, at the end of the battle, they would find remains of baby remains within the walls of the mission.
No.
And I was wondering if that was true or not.
Not true. It was that came out of very strong anti-Catholic, anti-clerical culture that existed with the revolutionary government in Mexico. One of the oldest urban Catholic legends, and that's a real nasty one, it was a post-Reformation one, was the idea that sisters, nuns existed just to be seduced by priests, and when they became pregnant, the babies were born, baptized, and killed, and buried under the monastery walls. They've never been found, never existed. That's a real old, vicious anti-Catholic legend.
Well, I appreciate you answering it, because for a long time it just stayed in the back of my mind last 20 years and never did anything about investigating it, so I'm glad you clarified.
It's a nasty, ugly one. No truth in history.
Clemente, thank you so much for the call. Bob, as you can tell by the music, we're running short on time once again. Thank you so much for coming back on Catholic Answers Live.